Good morning, gentlemen. In continuous with our earlier topic, where I had talked about it, why should hero be of the same age and sex as being shown into the picture about which you are writing story in TAT? Today, I would talk to another phenomena which really occurs. While writing a TAT story, there is a tendency, though it may be very few percent of the people, if they made a hero as Ram or Shyam that he made, and as he continues writing the story, he changes it to her and she. Why this occurs? No, this is a phenomena. You remember our mythology here talked about Earth Nareshwar. It means what? There is something in all of us, something which is peculiar to a male and something peculiar to female. So there is a continuum. You cannot afford to have exclusively either male or female. That is biological, yes, but psychological, no. So before we understand that topic, it will be pertinent to talk about some of the fundamental uh, knowledge about these aspects. So what I would be talking today is what I call it as a psychology of gender and its related concept, including sex, gender roles, gender identity, sexual orientation, and sexism. They are all things which is very common today, but our knowledge about them is very, very small. Now, my own partner, when we used to discuss uh, a TAT, he used to tell me, why do you say sex? Why can't you say gender? So it means now there's a difference between sex and gender. Sex is biological. Gender is what society thinks about it. Okay. So before we go, as I have already talked about it, we have co-authored along with my partner, uh, Chandrasekhar Azad, and with Captain Shashir Rai, four of the books which are there on the which can be taken from Saber and Quill, or even from Amazon. Okay. Notwithstanding the same, let's understand what is sex. Refers to the biological category of male and female as defined by physical differences in genetic composition, in reproductive anatomy and function. What has God made it? That's all. Whereas gender refers to the cultural, social, and psychological meaning that are associated with masculinity and femininity. Okay. You can think of a male and a female as distinct categories of sex. A person is typically born a male or a female. But when it talks of masculinity and femininity, it's a continuous continuum associated with gender. Everyone has certain degree of masculine and feminine traits and qualities. I did talk about it, what we call as a no Earth Nareshwar. That is concept our epics have been talking about since the beginning. Even Brahma, when it divided itself in two parts, one became Manu and another became Satrupa. So this, as far as our own culture is concerned, it is an old concept. But let's talk about the gender roles. Are the behavior, attitude, and personality traits that are designated as either masculine or feminine in a given culture. So it varies from culture, different society to society. It's common to think of gender roles in terms of gender stereotype. What does it mean? It's a belief and expectation people hold about typical characteristics, preferences, and behavior of men and women. It may not be psychologically correct, it may not be factually correct, but this is what is, you think this is what it should be. Gender identity refers to the person's psychological sense of being male or female. And sexual orientation is the direction of person's emotional and erotic attraction towards members of the opposite sex, the same sex or both sexes. It is important to recognize that sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation do not always correspond with one another. A person can be biologically male but have a female gender identity while being attracted to women of any other combination of identities and orientations. Okay, now if that is the case, now first let's talk about the gender. Historically, in terms of gender and sex have been usually interchangeably used because this gender is often viewed as a binary, either male or a female. Transgender also exists, that's a separate issue. We will not talk about it. A person is either male or female, and we assume that a person's gender matches their biological sex. This is not always the case, however, in some recent research has separated these two terms. Then called cisgender. Is a majority of people do identify with the gender that matches their biological sex. But there is estimated 0.6% of the population identify a gender that does not match with the biological sex. For example, an individual who is biologically male may identify female or vice versa. And that's why the change of sex and all this is being taken place because the technology has come into play. Male has become female, female has become male. That's what is happening. Okay. Then the word has come gender queer or gender non-binary are umbrella terms used to describe a wide range of individuals who do not identify with and or conform to the gender binary. He may not be male or female. These terms encompass a variety of more specific labels. Individuals may use it to describe themselves. One is called gender fluid, an individual who may identify as male, female, both or neither at different times and in different circumstances. Then agender, individual who may have no gender or describe themselves as having a neutral gender. That's called bigender. Individual identifies as two genders, both male as well as female. It is important to remember that sex and gender do not always match and that gender is not always binary. However, a large majority of prior research examining gender has not made these distinctions yet. As such, we'll talk about, we restrict our discussion to only the binary system. Okay, because that is what our society is generally looks for. Difference between now let's comes back to the gender. What are gender differences? Difference between male and female can be based on three factors. What are actual gender differences? He can male, men or women, actually different in some abilities. Next is gender roles. Difference in how men and women are supposed to act. And third is equal gender stereotypes. That is, difference is how we think men and women should behave. Sometimes gender stereotypes and gender roles reflect actual gender differences, but sometimes they do not. So the first point which we talked about is gender differences. It occurs because of language and language skill. Girls develop language skill earlier and know more words than boys. This does not, however, translate into long-term differences. Girls are also more likely than boys to offer praise, to agree with persons they are talking to, and to elaborate on other persons' comments. Boys are more likely than girls to assert their opinion and offer criticism. So that was a language and skill. Next comes temperament. Boys are slightly less able to suppress inappropriate responses and slightly more likely to blurt things out than girls. Aggression is the third. Boys exhibit higher rates of unprovoked physical aggression than girls, but no difference in provoked aggression. Play styles of children. Boys frequently play organized, rough and tumble games in large groups, while girls often play less physical activities in much smaller groups. Next, the rate of depression. Girls are more likely than boys to be depressed after puberty. Often puberty, after puberty, girls are also more likely to be unhappy with their bodies than boys. Next comes activity level. Boys are considered more active than girls. However, 42% of girls are more active than average boys. Next comes esteem. 50% of boys have higher uh, esteem than the girls. Okay. Next comes again, many gender differences do not reflect. Next comes a special ability, especially something space. Boys show better special ability than girls, means how placing one object with respect to another. That is very special. However, girls have the chance to practice their special practice and increase their special abilities. Many domains we assume differ across genders are really based on gender stereotypes. Means there's no scientific no appreciation or which confirms our thought based on analysis. Girls are not more fearful, shy, or scared new things than boys. Normally, earlier we used to think girls are more fearful, which is not the case. And normally we think boys are angry. Boys are not more angry than girls. Girls are not more emotional than boys. Boys do not perform better at maths than girls. Girls are not talkative than boys. But this is what the perception which exists with our society. So there is a subtle difference. Next comes the gender roles. Gender roles are well established social construction that many changes from culture, which may change from culture to culture over time. We commonly think of gender roles in terms of gender stereotype, which we had just not talked about it, or beliefs and expectations people hold about a typical characteristics, preferences, and behavior of men and women. By the time we are adults, our gender roles are stable part of personality, and we usually hold many gender stereotypes, as I have talked. Children start to learn about gender very early. By first birth, children can distinguish faces by gender. By second birthday, they can label others' gender and even sort objects into gender type categories. By third birthday, children can consistently identify their own gender. At this stage, children believe sex is determined by external attributes and not by biological attributes. Between 3 and 6 years of age, children learn that gender is constant and cannot change simply by changing external attributes. Having developed gender constancy, that is, during this period, children also develop strong and rigid gender stereotypes. Stereotype can refer to play. For example, boys play with trucks and girls play with dolls. And it like traits. Boys are strong, girls are likely to cry more. In occupation, men are doctors and women are nurses, which may not be true, which are not true at all at least in our time. These stress stay rigid until children reach the age of 8 or 9. Then they develop cognitive ability that allow them to be more flexible and they think rightly about other people. Next, talk about development of gender roles and gender stereotype. Many of our gender stereotypes are so strong because we emphasize gender in our culture. Gender and culture. For example, males and females are treated differently before they are even born. When someone learns about new pregnancy, you would like to find out whether it's going to be a boy or girl. Why? Immediately upon hearing the answer, judgments are made about the child. Boys will be rough like blue and girls will be delicate, which may not be true. Development intergroup theory is the which explains the gender. Around there, postulates that adults' heavy focus on gender leads children to pay attention to gender as a key source of information about themselves and others, and seek out many possible gender differences and to form rigid stereotypes based on gender that are subsequently difficult to change. Next, gender schema theory argues that children are active learners who essentially socialize themselves. In this case, children actively organize others' behavior, activities, and attributes into gender categories, which are known as schemas. These schemas are are then affect that children notice and remember later. People of all ages are more likely to remember are more likely to remember schema consistent behavior and attributes. If you think I'm a male, I must behave like a male, not like female. Then schema inconsistent behavior and attributes. So people are more likely to remember men and forget women and who are safe. When you talk firefighter, you believe men. No, may not be necessary now. They are also they also misremember schema, inconsistent information. So that is the how the development has taken. The third is what called social learning theory. Argue that gender roles are learned through reinforcement, punishment, and modeling. Children are rewarded and reinforced for behavior in concordance with gender roles and punished for breaking gender rules. In addition, social learning theory argues that children learn many of their gender roles by modeling the behavior of adults and older children, and in doing so, develop ideas about what behaviors are appropriate for each gender. Social learning theory has also support that that is famous gender schema theory. Research shows that the parents do enforce gender appropriate play, but for the most part treat their male and female children similarly. Okay. Next one, what is gender sexism and socialization? Treating boys and girls and men and women differently is both a consequence of gender differences of and cause of gender differences. Gender discrimination, differential treatment on basis of gender is an inevitable consequence of gender stereotype. We expect a boy to behave like a boy, man. Sexual harassment, when differential treatment is based on unwanted treatment related to sexual behavior or appearance, by the time boys and girls reach the end of, say, high school, most have experienced some sort of sexual harassment, most common to in the line in the form of unwanted touching, comments, being the target of jokes, having their body parts rated, or being called names related to sexual orientation. Different treatment by gender begins with parents. A meta-analysis of research found that parents most frequently treat their sons and daughters differently by encouraging gender stereotypical activities. Father, more than mothers, are particularly likely to encourage gender stereotypical play, essentially on especially for sons. Parents also talk to the children differently based on the stereotype. For example, parents talk about numbers and counting twice as often than daughter, and talk to sons in more detail about science than with daughters. Parents are also much more likely to discuss emotion with their daughters than their son. Children do a large degree of socialization themselves. By the age of 3, children play in gender segregated play groups and expect a high degree of conformity. Children who are perceived as gender atypical, that is, do not conform to gender stereotype, are more likely to be bullied and rejected by their own group. By the own group. So this is next comes a gender stereotype typically maintain gender inequality in society. What we call ambivalent sexism recognize the complex nature of gender attitude in which women are often associated with positive and negative quality. It has two components. First is called hostile sexism, refers to the negative attitude of women as inferior and incompetent relative to men. Next, called benevolent sexism refers to the perception that women need to be protected, supported, and adored by men, which exists in our society. Okay, there has been considerable empirical support for behavior benevolent sexism, possibly because it is seen as more socially acceptable than hostile sexism. We are all expected, say, if you are going in a bus, if a female is standing, we are supposed to give respect. We must get up and let her sit. Across culture, males tend to be associated with stronger and more active characteristics than female. In recent years, gender related concepts have become a common focus of social change and social debate. Many societies have been seen a rapid change in perception of gender roles, media, media portrayals of gender, and legal trends relating to gender. As society gender roles and gender restrictions continue to fluctuate, the legal system and the structure of society will continue to change and adjust. Okay, that is what I have to talk about it. Next, based upon this fundamental, we would be talking about why in TAT story people change from a hero being a male and he comes back in between talking about he, she, or her. It's primarily because both uh, there is a continuum of both male and female characteristics in all of us. Right then, hope you like this. Thank you.